Thank you, Mr. Rodden. We are now back live, 7:30. Continue on with our meeting of November 22nd of Beaumont City Council. Next on our agenda item is 6E, local transit planning moving forward. Who is speaking from administration on that? Johannes, welcome back to council. Mr. Wong, please proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of council.
Oh, hang on. You should be on there. Hang on. There you go.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm here today to provide council with a progress update on the two items that was made by a motion from council on May the 10th on two items. One is the feasibility study, and the other one is pilot on-demand bus service. So I will proceed with and report on each item. For the local transit feasibility study, after the May council meeting, we worked with ISL engineering to define the scope, the process, the timeline, and everything that are required to include in this study. And the project began at the end of August. The first engagement opportunity was held between September 23rd and October 11th. We started with participated in an event, the Taste of Beaumont, on September 24th. So, and also we started the community survey on the website. So a copy of the draft, very preliminary survey result from the feasibility study was attached to the council report. It is very preliminary. So we haven't done any, we had just started doing some analysis on the data now. So for the Taste of Beaumont event, we talked to over 100 people attending the event. And for the survey, we received over 260 results back. So, and the results are, like I said, is presented in this draft. So we are working on the analyzing the survey result, and also ISL engineering. They are working on all the technical background to support and to come up with a recommendation to council. And we anticipate to bring that final report to council in the spring of 2023. So with regarding to the pilot bus on demand transit service, we immediately started project managing the study. So we work to internally, we work on what constitute the pilot study, what the scope will be, the procurement requirements, the timeline, etc. And by September this year, we were ready to approach the service provider to negotiate further actions. But unfortunately, because the timing is not really aligned with what the project team anticipated, initially we thought we would just go ahead and do it without really thinking on all this nitty-gritty stuff like the contract and everything. So by the time in September, we are thinking with the negotiation with the service provider, it may not be in time for a pilot study in alignment with the feasibility study. So for that reason, the project team actually is recommending that the pilot study be postponed until the feasibility study is complete, and to ensure if we are doing a pilot, it will be in alignment with what the feasibility's recommendation would be. For example, what we are thinking is if the recommendation from the feasibility study is to say the delivery model for the local transit is bus on demand, then there is the opportunity to come back to council and say, do we want to still run the pilot, or does council want the administrations to develop the program and run it? And the benefit of running a bus on demand is very flexible because they are running on an app. They can add stops, they can remove stops, they can add sort of in quote a route, not the defined route, but they can add a routing on the app. So it is very easy. It is, and many of the municipalities in our discussion with ISL is initially and municipality, when they start up the bus on demand, they will define something, but it will be on the go. They will amend that. So we are thinking it may be more if the understatement is if it is a recommendation from the feasibility study that is recommending the bus on demand, maybe it will save us some resources to undertake the pilot, so we can go ahead and do the design the bus on demand program. So, and that is my update to council at this time. So I'm open to council for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Appreciate that. Very thorough report. And I do believe we have some information coming to us at budget. I believe it's considered unfunded right now for 2023's budget, this idea, but it does help to have the update you're providing this evening is before our budget deliberations, which are next week. So having said that, I will open up to councillors. Any question they may have of Mr. Wong this evening? Oh, Councillor Barnhart, your light went on, went off again. You want it back on again? Okay, there you go. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just wondering, like, I understand the need to kind of wait and make sure we've done all the consultation that we can. But I read in the report that we're still analyzing what we've received to date, and yet there's already some analysis that's happened. Can you elaborate on what it is you're looking at, given the consultation that we already have done?
Actually, the consultation, the survey results indicated that just over half of the respondents responded saying that either themselves, the respondent, or one of their family members would take transit. So we received 265 survey results, and 143 indicated that they would want themselves or one of their family members would take transit, and the other 122 responded they won't. So that is probably one of the most obvious results. And the other one interesting thing that we through the result we get is of the 143 respondents that says they would take local transit, and we asked them, have they taken the Beaumont transits to the city of Edmonton? And only 45 said yes. So it is only 39%, less than 40% said yes, they are currently taking transit. So it is a little bit surprise to me, but I think the focus on this survey is local transit, and from this interpretation, I'm guessing the respondents, they really would like to see local transit happening in Beaumont, disregard whether there is they are taking transit to city of Edmonton. They want something within the city, and the purposes of taking the transit, largely speaking, they are. Let me go to that slide. Where is that? Here. The most frequent answer, 78 of them says recreation. They would take transit to local recreation, shopping, and appointments. And a lot of the people that they indicated they would take transit to all these venues. Surprisingly, it is not really. I shouldn't say seniors. There is a need for the seniors, but it is 35 to 44. So yeah, this is very surprising. Yeah.
If I could, one
Yes,
follow up. I also noticed, Mr. Wong, that some of the respondents, I think 47% said school was one of their destinations, and that kind of surprised me because I thought school buses provide transport. So what's your take on that? Is there any more information that you could share with us?
Yeah, because this, like I said, this is a very preliminary survey result, but we also did some breakdown on the participant, on the respondents. So actually, the group that talks about going to take transit to local school, actually 35 to 44, the age group between that. There are 29 out of the, where is the 54?
Which is interesting. Sounds like the parents are wanting the
Yeah.
bus to take the kids when they miss the school bus is what I was thinking, but anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
well,
one of, actually, I just recalled one of the comment, because one of the question is asked whether they have additional comments to the project team. One of the comment is because they don't have local transit, they have to take school bus.
oh,
So
they prefer to take.
so that is
Interesting.
the chicken and egg thing.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much for that, and I look forward to the future.
Thank you, Councillor. See no further questions from Mr. Wong. Is a member of council willing to move the adoption of the report as information, please? Councillor Barnhart. Kathy?
I'd be pleased to move that the November 22nd, 2022 report, local transit planning moving forward, update be received for information.
Thank you, Councillor. Discussion on the motion, members of council? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Wong, for the presentation this evening. Appreciate that. Next on our agenda is 6F, Quarterly Financial Report, Q3 2022. Mr. DeBlanco, I believe you're presenting this evening. Please proceed at your convenience.
Thank you. Good evening to the mayor and council. I'm Curtis DeBlanco. I'm the director of finance for the city. Before council this evening is the third quarter financial report. And this once again provides council with an interim financial update on both the 2022 city budget as well as reserve balances. I'll imagine council's had an opportunity to read through the report on the agenda, so I won't go through it word for word, but I'll discuss a few of the highlights and major contributors to ultimately what's driving a forecasted deficit of $470,000 in the city's municipal operating budget. From a revenue perspective, the city's actually forecasting to receive around $1 million in additional revenue. So that's a good news story. The line items driving this additional revenue are sales and user charges to the tune of $320,000, franchise fees, an extra $111,000 is forecast, and investment income, an additional $456,000 is forecast. One important thing to note with investment income, this is a great story in relation to the city's treasury and reserve balances, but this doesn't contribute to an operating surplus. Reason being is interest earned on reserve balances and deferred revenue cash balances is then subsequently transferred to these reserves in an offsetting transfer. Therefore, there's no net impact on the city's budget. This practice is in line with the city's reserve policy and investment policy, as well as grant program guidelines and then budgeting best practice. And what this does is just reduce any exposure the city may have to interest rate risk and fluctuating interest rates. So the net impact of this additional $1 million in revenue is approximately $500,000 on the city's $500,000 on the city's operating budget once we take out that interest income. Looking at operating expenses, the city's forecasting to spend approximately $800,000 additional in operating expenses beyond budgeted amounts to deliver city services. At a high level, a good portion of this is from inflation that we're seeing in the economy to date. However, some specific drivers that are requiring additional spending include snow clearing that we saw in Q1, some strategic consulting services, other contracted services, and resources required to ensure IT and cybersecurity for the city. The next kind of section of the municipal operating budget is transfers, which include contributions to and from the city's reserves, as well as transfers amongst the utility and capital budgets. Within those transfers is a net negative impact of $200,000 that does contribute to that overall deficit. So to summarize, plus approximately $500,000 in revenue to the good, approximately $100,000 expenses to the bad, and then that net impact of the transfers of $200K results in a net deficit of $470,000 being forecast for the municipal operating budget. Included in the report is a table providing the status of some notable one-time operating projects that were funded as part of the 2022 operating budget. And that includes the digital master plan, which council heard this evening. There's individual statuses and notes for each of those. In the event that a project is incomplete at year end and requires budget to complete post year end or after year end. It would then go through the city's carry forward process and come back to council for approval to increase the 2023 budget. On the utility operating budget, which is the next page of the attachment, specifically on revenue, the forecasts provided indicate less revenue is expected on utilities, approximately $500,000 or 5%. This underage is offset directly by lower costs paid to the commissions for things like water and wastewater, so it kind of evens out on a net basis. Included in the utility operating budget are reserve transfers from the utility reserve to fund some one-time projects like the utility master plan update, stormwater management, and a watershed study. Work on each of these is in the preliminary stages, so it's only forecast that a total net draw of 45,000 be required to start these projects off, and it's anticipated the work is likely to carry into 2023 on these, with completion anticipated by Q2 of 2023. Overall, on the utility operating budget, a net surplus of approximately $324,000 is being forecast. As always, if there is a surplus on a utility budget, the recommendation that'll come from administration is that that surplus be transferred to the utility budget, or sorry, the utility reserve rather. Next on capital, at this point, it's forecast that approximately 75% of the city's capital budget will have been spent by the end of the year. For certain projects not completed by year end, administration may request that budget funds be carried forward to the 2023 budget year to complete. Some notable projects, specifically growth projects within the capital budget that have either been completed or are expected to be completed by the end of the year include that Four Seasons Park multi-use field and trails, the West Rec site, providing a shovel-ready school site within the Rousseau neighborhood, as well as community signage, traffic signal, and wayfinding signage. The 2022 capital budget did include funding, or does include funding rather, allocated for design and engineering of deep utilities to service the Beaumont Innovation Park. At this point, it is not, this work isn't expected to commence within the year, so these budgeted funds are likely to be requested carry forward for the 23 capital budget. That being said, the forecast is approximately 2.5 million, which is under, and this includes work to include the area structure plan there. And since the forecast is lower than what the total budget is, it is not expected that the entire budget will be requested to be carried forward to 2023's budget. There are a few projects noted within the report that are not expected to be completed in the year and that administration has recommended be canceled. Some smaller projects for replacement asphalt patches on 50th Avenue, some design work for Spray Park, as well as renewal projects for a few units. Excluding the savings attributable to the Innovation Park and these canceled items, the forecast savings overall on the capital budget is approximately 1.1 million or 5.2%. On to reserves, it's forecast, as alluded to before, that due to interest, the reserve allocation will actually be approximately 600,000 more than budgeted. And this is largely due to the additional interest income that these reserve balances have earned in the year. When this is combined with some unspent amounts on renewal programs and one-time projects, the net result is that closing reserve balances will be approximately $1.7 million higher than what was originally forecast at the time of budget approval. One important thing to note on reserve balances for council's information is that each of these reserves, as shown on the projected close, are funded within the range set forth by city's reserve policy. So each of them is within the city's reserve policy. Lastly, as always, should the city incur an operating deficit on its municipal operating budget, a draw from reserve would be required to balance the budget. And for municipal operations, the most appropriate source of funding for this would be the financial stabilization reserve. In contrast, if the city saw a surplus, the city admin would then recommend a reserve to transfer it to. If all reserves are funded appropriately, the likely scenario would be for administration to recommend it go back to the financial stabilization reserve. And then on utilities, same thing. If there is a surplus, administration will recommend that it go to the utility, or sorry, to the utilities reserve, any deficit drawn from. It is admin's intent to reduce the forecasted deficit as best as possible while still maintaining service. This concludes my report for this evening. I'll turn the floor back to council. Thank you.
Go 1 second, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, awesome. So quick comment. Thank you, Mr. Blanco, for the presentation. Very informative. A lot of information there, a lot of numbers, especially on a late Tuesday night, which is awesome. So coming in roughly 1% on a $50 million budget is actually pretty razor thin. So that's a good thing. So with that, I'll open up to council for questions. Councillor Tessier, Renee.
Thank you, and thanks for this presentation. I like the layout to seeing last year's capital funding and how that all looks and where we're at. Just a question on the canceled projects. So the three of the asphalt, the spray park, the hook truck, and light duty truck at $256,000. So that goes into the reserves in case we go over in 2023 and can pull from that, or are we able to move that now, say into the 2023 budget item lines, move the spray park into the new spray park so that number is higher? Like, I guess 2 questions in there.
Yeah, thanks for the question through the mayor to Councillor Tessier. It would depend on each of these individual projects funding source. Off the top of my head, I don't have what they are, but if I look at them, I believe I can probably come up with a response. Just give me 1 second here.
Take your time.
So if I recall correctly, the asphalt patches was grant funded, so that would remain in the city's deferred revenue grant pool for a future budget, including the 2023 capital budget. Design work for the spray park, I believe that was also funded via grant. If it was indeed a renewal, then those funds would remain in the reserve. And then the fleet renewal, once again, that funding would come from the fleet renewal or the fleet and equipment renewal reserve. Funds remain in the reserve for a future year.
Yeah, and kind of where I'm going with that is we've seen the spray park kind of over and over, so that I just see $256,000, and I rather see it sit in the next year's spray park, so that money's just larger and we can move things a little bit further ahead. But I don't know how to approach that. Like, is this something we have to leave? I guess I'm looking for procedure.
Mr. Blanco, can you comment on that? Is that
Like, does it have to stay there?
So the appropriate mechanism for that would be the 2023 budget process. We know the balances. If these projects do not proceed, these balances for these funding sources will be higher than what was originally forecast, say in the budget before. It's important when we look at the proposed budget is that we tie funding sources to whether it's a renewal or a growth project. So if we're talking about a renewal project, we want to make sure that we're funding it from our reserves that we put away to fund those. If we're talking about funding a growth project, we'd want to make sure we're not drawing from our reserves that are slated for renewal assets. So we'd want to make sure that those funding sources tied to whatever the project is.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that makes more sense, because the new one in the new budget is for a different location. This one's for the circulation system that we got a report or a presentation on that we don't know if we're doing or not. So in the budget, there was 2 different things. The one spray park for a new location, the other part of it was to rehab the existing one.
Do you have a follow-up question? I think I see.
No,
that.
I'm thinking because
It's okay.
I don't want to lose track of money that's going into a new budget when we have 256 grand, but that's sitting in 3 different reserves or 2 different reserves, depending. So in the new budget, if the spray park is on there for the existing 4 seasons ones, technically we could increase that funding another 25 grand in the new 2023 budget.
There would be $25,000 remaining in the reserve that was unspent from 22 that can be used to a future year. I wouldn't necessarily tie the 2 things together, but I would keep those decisions separate. That would be our administration's recommendation, separate issues rather. But yes, the overall capital funding pool that is available to fund capital projects is that $200,000 higher, give or take.
Okay. Thank you. I'm good, Mayor. Appreciate the answers to those.
No problem, Council. Those are Good question to have. And when we went to our shop next week, we'll probably tend to move to that issue again, I'm sure, next week. Councilor Newkirk, followed by Councilor Barnhart. Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question on page 5 with the reserves balances and stuff. And I did put a question forward similar to this in the budget questions. I'm just wondering if in the spirit of the reserve study that was done and ensuring and looking back to make sure that our reserve balances are adequate relative to growth, right? Because when the reserve study was done, we were a certain size and presumably you would index those reserves alongside growth. I just wonder if there's a way in the future to get that piece of information onto page 5 as well. You know, do you understand what I mean? Like an indication of, you know, is the reserve balance within a predetermined healthy level, right? Because we don't get that information from the page. What we get is what we started with, where it went and what we ended with, but we haven't been able to incorporate, you know, kind of a green or a red or a color coding or something in there to just do that last check and balance to say, as per the reserve study that we did, index to growth, these are healthy balances. Am I making sense? Like, do you understand what I'm kind of getting at there, or wondering how we would do that?
Yeah, thanks for the question and suggestion through the mayor to Councillor Van Newkirk. If I consider the reserve study, what we're dealing with then is typically percentage of assets or, you know, funding future projects. There's just for context, there's multiple times in the year when administration does evaluate what the reserve balances are. One of those times is at budget time and ensuring that what is in a proposed budget is a transfer required to maintain these reserve balances at necessary levels. The second time is after year end, when we have those actuals. Administration will either recommend a transfer of surplus to any that could be unfunded or underfunded, or some that could be requiring more. Administration may also recommend a transfer between reserves to ensure that some that could be overfunded are then brought within that range, or underfunded brought up. In terms of presentation, by all means, we could add a third column that just has a check mark indicating we are within the range. And
Yeah, for sure.
the suggestion.
Yeah, and I put the same question forward to budget for that reason, knowing that that's kind of the reconcile time for those things, and of course there's movement in and out of those throughout the year. But one of the questions that I've got most on reserves over the years is, do we have too much or do we have not enough? And we had a hard time answering that before the reserve study. So I'm just trying to make a loose connection in the closest way possible.
Sure.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Councillor Barnhart, you have the floor, Kathy.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Blanco, yours is not an easy task, and we could ask you so many different questions here. So I appreciate if you don't have the answer to these questions and can get back to us at another time. But the two questions, one is on food bank, and I appreciate the update here. What I'm concerned about is that we're going to be going through the winter season and there's no location yet that I'm aware of. And I understand that, you know, some of the circumstances that led to this, but I'm wondering if there's anything the administration or council can do to find a temporary location, and given the money is there in the budget, is there something that can be considered on a temporary basis? And I appreciate if that's not something that you can respond to. I'm just wondering if that's been looked into at all.
Thanks for the question through the mayor to Councillor Barnhart. That wouldn't be something that I could answer on temporary location. I can speak to the funding that it hasn't been utilized yet. Alluded to on a one-time basis. If council supportive, it could be carried forward to a future year. But in terms of the location, I'll defer to if there's a member of administration that can speak to that.
Maybe Mr. Schwartz, is there anything that?
Mr. Schwartz? Oh, hang on. There you go.
Yes, I'm not going to be able to add a lot to that, other than we are working and trying to support that group to find a location. As far as how quickly that can occur, I don't know. We don't have the space, so it's got to be secured somewhere in the community. So I know, I believe you've had a couple conversations with that group as well, have you not, Mayor Daniluk?
Which group is that?
The food bank.
Yes. Yeah, they're still working on their locational requirements and they can back to school in the near future with that. So I
And
can
this
give you
is
no
a-
more than that at this point.
This is a key time of the year when people are needing more. And, you know, just if we had just some temporary location, just,
I
Again,
cannot agree more. I
I
think they are
appreciate
working.
that. Maybe that's another notice of motion or something, but would like to see something happen.
Yeah, I can probably enlighten a little bit on that, that they are working on trying to find a temporary location until they find something more permanent.
Mhm.
And I can't disclose what those are at this point, but they are working on a stopgap because they thought they'd be further along the process, namely down a final location. And we all have discussion about that already. So they are working on something temporary.
So that money would be available if they were to find something before the end of the year.
Having said that, I'm not sure if our agreement with that group of people trying to find a food bank location specifies if they find something temporary or permanent. I don't remember the exact wording of the detail. May have to bring that back to budget it, or maybe council ministry can let us know after the discussion this evening if the agreement is specific to the 60,000, their first bit of money, if they have to have a permanent location or just a location. That I'm not sure.
And
Mr.
the-
Schwartz, can you enlighten on that?
Yeah, what I recall from the agreement is it does not state whether it's permanent or temporary. If we can get it up and running, then the way the agreement's written, and then we would pay them.
Okay.
Need to remind everybody that the Leduc region food bank is still open, and I know it's ideal to get it here in Beaumont, and they're trying very, very hard.
Even if there was just someplace to drop off the
Yeah.
food, you know, like the fire hall or something like that.
Mhm.
Just put that idea out there, but
Last
anyway,
time I talked to the location, the people involved asked them to update as soon as they possibly can. That was just a couple, 3 weeks ago. So your point is taken, but I think it's in their ballpark to figure out something temporary or try to get something more permanent established quickly and begin the process of setting up.
it's good to know we're open to that and the communication is still happening.
Yes.
My second question, Mr. DeBlanco, is around the library. And I noticed that, again, as of the end of September, that the library is, expenses are coming in under. And I know that's early in the year yet. We still have another quarter of detail there. My question is around if at the end of the fiscal year, the library does have additional funding that they didn't need, that they didn't spend, surplus, recognizing that some of that, of course, is grants and other sources of funding. Does the library, can they keep those funds to the future year? And how does that work?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Barnhart. So the way it is set up currently is that any surplus that is within the library's operating budget, it's then reported on as part of the year-end process, disclosed to council, and then it is retained by the library in their unrestricted surplus.
Okay.
The library board can then determine what to do with it, whether it goes to their reserves or whatnot. This is a new practice in the last and procedure within the last year or two. And this allows them a little bit more autonomy to deal with their surplus funds.
Good, appreciate that. And the library does have that, the act, which is different than, again, other city departments. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. See no further questions from council. Is there a member of council willing to move the third quarter financial report as information? Councillor Tessier, Renee.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that the November 22nd, 2022 quarterly financial report as set out in the attachment 1 be received as information.
Thank you, Councillor. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none from council, please vote on the motion on the screen. And that carries unanimously. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Blanco, for your presentation this evening. Next on our agenda is we have 6G and 6H, which are under consent, and 6I also under consent. We now move into councillor inquiries, responses, and reports. I do believe Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's heavy truck traffic request for information was sent back by email. I see Mr. Van Nieuwkerk. Would you wish to speak on that? Steve?
Yeah, I'll speak to this one a little bit, and I'll submit a subsequent inquiry for it. And then I also brought another inquiry for tonight. Just thanks to administration for the answer on that one. And I'll drive a little bit further down in a subsequent inquiry around if and when we do in fact approve road use agreements that go by schools or not. I think we should really consider a practice that eliminates having heavy traffic approved going by schools where we can avoid it. So, but I'll follow with the subsequent advisory on that. And then I did bring another inquiry for tonight as well, just relative to densities.
Sure.
Or sorry, no, this one's SEEP, sorry, densities. There's a precursor for a notice of motion. Please provide an update on the Clean Energy Improvement Program, SEEP in Beaumont, and include the following. Status of the SEEP bylaw, when the program will be initiated, and communication plan to residents. So it was pointed out to me that the December 13th meeting is slated for an update on this. I just had received a few responses from folks trying to get, finances in order for next year, wondering if this plan is coming together relative to other things that might be available or anticipated to be available to do improvements in their home. And neighborhood conversation, and all of a sudden there was a bunch of interest. So I said I would bring that forward tonight. So that's what I've done. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further councillor inquiries, response to reports this evening? Councillor Newkirk, you said had a subsequent inquiry. Oh, sorry, I misunderstood your comment. Sorry. Any further councillor inquiries? Seeing none, thank you. We'll move on to CEO update. Mr. Schwartz, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor Danlock, the rest of the council, members of the public. Got a few items from Recreation. The BSRC is hosting a pool operator 2 course that includes 22 participants. That's happening this week. The participants come from around the province. And they're part of the Alberta Association of Recreation Facility Personnel. So this is a continuance of a program that we started this year when we hosted the arena operator course as well. So it's good to showcase our city and our facility, and it's been well received from the industry. So thank you to Paul and Recreation. On an infrastructure side, as you'll probably notice, the outdoor rinks, we've put a base coat on. It's underway. Opening dates are predetermined by the weather, of course, and +8 on Wednesday. So, or +8 on Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday. So some challenges right now with the weather, but I'm not complaining. Snow removal is in full swing. We've successfully plowed and removed all P1s and P2s. And that was within 3 days of the first major snow event. So well done. Christmas decorations went up today. And one that was outstanding, and you had a picture for me, just quickly from last meeting, I was asked the question whether the Elan crosswalk will be, in fact, be one of the lighted crosswalks. And the answer is yes. I know I sent an email to council telling you that, but I just thought I'd say it so that the public knew that as well. Last couple items, budget 2023 full time is in full swing. We received 170 questions from council, all on time, I might add. Thank you. That's I think a first. Thank you. And the responses are being prepared. And for the members of the public, the questions and responses will be made public next week, as they have been in previous years. And speaking of next week, the budget workshop starts on November 30th to December 2nd. The public is welcome to come. It's in the evenings, but it will be streamed as well and posted to our website. So that's what I had for an update. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Any questions for our CEO for his report? See none, move on in our agenda. Notice of the motion. Councillor Miller. Amendments to the community standards bylaw regarding construction waste. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I've been turning your mic on. There you go.
It's all good. So I'll read the motion and then speak to it. I move that by the end of February 2023, administration prepare a report on possible amendments to the community standards bylaw that would allow more proactive measures to address construction waste. So I am bringing forward this motion to explore amendments to the community standards bylaw to proactively deal with runaway garbage from construction bins ending up in neighbors' yards, ponds, and green spaces. The goal of improved amendments can lead builders and developers to adopt better environmental practices, lessen garbage on residential property, and keep waste out of ponds and communal areas. That is it.
Thank you, Councillor. Questions for Councillor Miller on her notice of motion from administration from council. Sorry, Councillor Tessier. Renee.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Miller, for bringing this forward. I think this is good. We've been obviously had a lot of open forums about this, so I'm in favor of the motion. I think it's something as simple either from lids to tarps, and depending on what they offer for that kind of thing. And I think the start for the community standards bylaw, ensuring that everyone has a bin is going to be a huge start because sometimes the builders, they don't have a bin at all. They just hire someone to come clean it up and that stuff just gets blown everywhere. So I would like to see in the report, if possible, like what other communities do, if it's a tarp or a lid. I don't know however many bins actually have lids, but just options would be great. So yeah, thanks for bringing this forward. In favor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions from council on the notice of motion before I call for the vote? Seeing none. Council, would you please vote on the notice of motion? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Miller. Look forward to the report coming back to us in the new year. Not that far away, actually. It's a few weeks. Are there any new notice of motion from members of council? Councilman Newkirk, Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. As I alluded to earlier, I brought a notice of motion tonight. At the December 13th, 2022 council meeting, I will move that by the end of the first quarter of 2023, administration prepare a report on the following: the determination and regulation of density targets in the Edmonton metropolitan region, i.e. information on current density targets for Beaumont and our region, the evolution of density targets for the city of Beaumont, an overview of how Beaumont's as-built density requirement compares to other municipalities in the region and province, i.e. mid-sized cities, Red Deer and Calgary regions, and a review of any variances granted, i.e. less than 35 units per net residential hectare to municipalities within the jurisdiction of the EMRB. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other notice of motion this evening before I have one of my own to present to council? Seeing none, Ms. Winter, could you put it up on the screen? We have a moment, please. Thank you. I move that by the end of the January 2023 administration prepare a report with possible enhancements to elected officials remuneration policy, provided that there is no increase to the cost of the city that would enable more flexibility for the mayor's benefit program and an alternative to participating in the LAP program, and also alternatives to approach for disability insurance coverage. Thank you. Are there any further notices of the motion from council this evening? Seeing none. Thank you, council. We have no closed session this evening and see no further agenda